From the library of the New York Stock Exchange, at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution for global growth for more than 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now, at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 7 clearinghouses around the world. Now here's your host, Josh King, Head of Communications at Intercontinental Exchange.
What is the world's most efficient way to market a product? Of the 20 most watched TV broadcasts in U.S. history, 19 are Super Bowls. The other one, the series finale of MASH. It's no surprise, then, that the Detroit Lions play at Ford Field, NYSE ticker symbol F. The Dallas Cowboys play in AT&T Stadium, NYSE ticker symbol T. The New York Giants play in MetLife Stadium, ticker symbol MET, and I could go on and on and on with these corporate tie-ins through the ranks of NFL teams before I land on such stately throwbacks as Arrowhead, Lambeau, and Soldier Field. On television, watching the spectacle of 22 men hurling each other at the limits of human momentum, billions of dollars are spent to tantalize us with cars from General Motors, ticker symbol GM, and Fiat Chrysler, ticker symbol FCAU. And don't even get me started on beer, mobile phones, and insurance. But what if there are cracks in that super efficient marketing mechanism? What if the humans aren't all they're cracked up to be? Or what if they are? And what if the President of the United States sees the game as a pawn to play in his weekly cadence of coalescing his base? Still, we watch. When the numbers came in after the vaunted New England Patriots fell to the formerly lowly Lions in Week 3 of the current season, the NFL had notched a 2.6% gain in total viewership over a year ago. I was one of them. So was Mark Leibovich, Chief National Correspondent of the New York Times Magazine and author of the new bestseller, Big Game, The NFL in Dangerous Times. We love the game, and we have since we were kids. What drives us to consume the drama and the marketing messages week after week? And how will that allure glue our kids to the tube in the decades ahead, like it does us? My conversation with Mark Leibovich, right after this.
Dick's Sporting Goods believes sports matter and that every kid deserves the chance to play. Since 2014, through their Sports Matter program, they have already helped over 1 million young athletes in all 50 states. As they continue in their mission to save youth sports, they invite you to join by visiting sportsmatter.org and donating today. More on Dick's Sporting Goods efforts later in the show.
On page 207 of Big Game, out now from Penguin Press, Mark Leibovich writes about hanging out in the lobby of the Newton, Massachusetts Marriott in the early 1980s, camped out for autographs from visiting players in town to face the often pathetic Patriots. He got there with a ride of about a mile from his house, driven by one of his parents or one of mine. And I was with him, pen and paper in hand, looking for a scribble from the likes of Nick Bonacani. For us, it was Xanadu. For the last 4 years, Mark has been making the rounds of modern-day Xanadu's, the gathering spots of the NFL, its owners' meetings, draft days, combines, and the big games themselves. Taking a break from the normal scrum he covers in Washington, D.C., he's lived to tell the tale, free, as far as I can tell, from any concussive run-ins with league security, and he joins us now inside the Ice House. Welcome, Mark.
Good to be with you, Josh. And yes, there are some childhood illusions that we will be reflecting on in this conversation.
First, let's make some news. What's your message for Robert? And by Robert, I mean Robert Kraft and the Hooded Genius. As of this recording, their team is 1-2 with embarrassing losses to the Jags and Lions. What's happening with the Patriot way?
Well, they are off to a very slow start. Panic is everywhere in New England, but we've seen this movie before. This has happened, off and on for the last several years, and by the end of the season, the Patriots tend to get better, so we take the long view.
You watch some of those episodes of Tom versus Time, and they're out in the Yellowstone Club with Danny Amendola and Julian Edelman from a couple of years ago or last summer. And it looked like these mid-range receivers were totally in sync with Tom Brady, but none of those guys are on the field.
Yeah, no. Well, as often happens with the Patriot way, they leave. I mean, once they get traded in for cheaper parts, unless you're Tom Brady, you go off, and Julian Edelman's been out. So we'll see. Look, it's early in the year. It's a September panic.
As you write, you move pretty well for a 52-year-old with two reconstructed ACL injuries.
Thank you for pointing. Yes, all true. Yeah. I was 52 when I wrote it. I'm 53 now.
As Al Michael would say, you're not slow to get up.
Yeah, I have not been hit by. I mean, luckily, look, as you can attest, I think I was a great kicker. I mean, we actually kicked some long field goals in your front and backyards. But no, what is interesting though is that NFL coaches have been dying for us to get out there and try out for them, but we're just not going to do it because the game's not safe.
But with all those injuries, did the 4 years following the league inflict any new injuries? I mean, was there any browbeating from 345 Park Avenue, the owners' offices, the people who would say, this guy who normally runs in the corridors of Washington should not be, isn't purpose-built for this kind of work?
It was surprisingly easy to sort of get into those worlds. I mean, one thing I did find is when you write about politics for a living, as I do, everyone's interested in politics these days. I mean, that is, other than the NFL, it's the best reality show we have going right in America. And everyone in football, or at least a lot of the owners in football, think they know something about politics. Many of them have personal relationships with a lot of the politicians, certainly Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and they were all quick to name drop. And they would see me on TV, and I would do like pundit work occasionally for like CBS or NBC, and they would think that I knew stuff. And I think they also liked the idea of talking to non-sports writers. So that was helpful, but no, it was a bizarre way, and I just sort of wandered in. They didn't quite know what to make of me, and I think at this point, good riddance to me. But I think I bore some scars, mainly to my liver, especially going down to Dallas and spending some time with Jerry Jones. But anyway, no, look, I'm back to being a political reporter again. There's all kinds of hazards and scars to be had there.
The First Lady of the Shield hasn't tweeted either from herself or from a pseudonym against you?
Yes, Jane Goodell, Roger's very protective, and I thought very, just delightful wife, no, she is not. But she was I loved meeting her. I mean, she's far more personable than her husband was.
So, Mark, let's look at a comparison. The Newton Marriott in the early 80s that I spoke about in the introduction, and the Boca Raton Resort and Club, the league meetings in March 2016. The owners were chagrined that they didn't have the breakers to go to, and you compare that to the way the Marriott lobby used to be.
The Marriott lobby to me, and I assume to you, was Shangri-La. I mean, this was like a beautiful, state-of-the-art, I guess, chain hotel in the 70s. I mean, it looked like a royal palace. I thought it was one of the great properties on the Marriott, in the Marriott Pantheon. But but my first owners meeting was at the Boca Raton Resort and Club, and all the owners were kvetching about why aren't we at the breakers? Once you've seen the breakers, once you've had your meetings at the breakers, which the NFL usually does when they do Florida, you cannot go back to anything else. So they were very angry, and they thought that the fact that the league could not get the breakers during that March meeting and had to settle for the Boca Resort was another sign that the Shield might not be as invincible as before. I will say parenthetically that I was in Palm Beach this weekend, and I stayed at the breakers. So I have prevailed. And at least as far as book touring goes, the breakers is still the number one choice.
So over piles of shrimp and stone crab, you have a moment to perhaps grab Commissioner Goodell, and before you can turn around to engage him, poof, he's gone.
He was gone. So this was a couple months after I had profiled the commissioner for a piece in the New York Times Magazine, and like every piece, he pretends not to read. He rarely gives interviews, so I was very, very lucky to have gotten that interview. I went up to him. I don't know what he had thought of the piece, but he claimed not to read it. He always did. He said it was good to see me again. A balloon pop, because the league thinks of everything. They had a magician and a guy doing balloons for the kids. Balloon pops. I looked in one direction. He was gone.
What is it? You talk about the kids around the pool at the Boca Raton Resort and Club. They're there. Their eyes are so wide seeing these players, agents, members of the press, officials. I mean, it is Shangri-La for them in 2018 and the years that you were writing the book. But for fans like us coming up in the 70s and 80s, I want to take a quick listen to the voice and the rhythm that shaped our perception of the storyline unfolding between the sidelines. The great John Facenda is the voice, and the writer is Steve Sable.
The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song, he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold, and the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold.
What is he talking about?
He's talking about the Oakland Raiders and John Madden and Gene Upshaw.
So he was talking about the Raiders, because that is poetry, man. That is great.
And I read your book.
There are echoes of that.
And there are echoes of that. There is that kind of poetry. And when you're in an interview, you can't conjure the same type of thesaurus work that I know you do in front of a screen when you put these books together.
Yeah.
But if you listen to Facenda and you listen to that kind of music that we so connected with,
right.
What was it that you write maybe in the first 20 pages of the book that made this game so special for you?
You know what's interesting about the NFL? I don't think I've said this before, but they're just marketing geniuses. I mean, they don't, from the earliest days in the league, or at least since television really became the dominant part of the sport, which is obviously in the 60s, which sort of coincides with when the NFL has been dominant. It's a perfect television sport. But they've also, along with that, just been brilliant marketers, having, just listened to that. I mean, it's way over the top. It's flowery, it's purple, it's melodramatic. And it's great. It's not subtle. I think one of the first very simple things that the marketers of the NFL realized is that it's much easier to sell non-subtlety than it is to sell like subtlety. And the problem with the modern game, or one of the complications of the modern game, is that life keeps intruding. Politics keeps intruding. Science and health and issues like domestic violence keep intruding. And it's sort of it doesn't allow football to be the escapism, the storybook, the reality TV show that they bill itself as. But look, I mean, football, it is told as a story. They got this John Facenda guy. It was his voice. He is this Philadelphia newscaster. I don't know, was he?
Philly.
Didn't particularly liked football, but he had this voice, and he's the soundtrack of our lives, right? And look, I think it's great. Even in retrospect, I think it's great. Is it hokey as all hell? Hell yeah. But it's the escapism we look to in our sports.
And we watch the weekly wrap-up shows, NFL Today, now airing on Showtime. You write extensively about Adam Schefter's Nuggets and ESPN's Sal Palantonio. But they are reducing this to 200 characters, or league sources say. That's so far away from the storytelling that Facenda, he was our only outlet to the game between Sundays.
It is, and look, if the NFL stayed stuck in the 60s and the John Facenda, they'd be dead in the water. I mean, the NFL, like every other company in America, is trying to evolve, and especially an entertainment company, they're trying to find the right platforms that people want. Now, and I say this in Big Game, I mean, the back of the pro transactions in the sports page that we used to look for, for like who's injured, whether so-and-so is questionable for Sundays. That's now commodified information that Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and Peter King and whoever else are fighting over to try to tweet out first, so that fantasy owners can, maybe they're more likely to be the go-to purveyor of these things, and it's a great business proposition for ESPN or NBC or whoever. So that's the way this has evolved, and I think the NFL, like any other company, is trying to keep up with that.
And myth-making at 345 Park even extends to the league administration. So you get into a conversation with Greg Aiello, and he introduces you to Todd Lewicki, and they speak in mountain metaphors about the work that the commissioner's doing.
Well, that's Todd. Todd Lewicki, who's no longer he's the COO, he's Roger Goodell's number 2. He had this great, he climbed Mount Rushmore with Roger Goodell when he was, I guess, working with the Seahawks, and he did some United Way campaign, and there's a long story there. Anyway, yes, he loved the mountain metaphors. Neither Greg nor Todd are with the company anymore, but that is sort of part of the awkward evolution that many of the sort of modern day executives are trying to, stay into the NFL.
Let's move out of New York because of the great political stories that you've written about for the Times Magazine in the past. They focus on California. Celebrity politicians like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Gavin Newsom. But in Los Angeles and Oakland today, the drama involves people like Stan Kroenke and Mark Davis. And as you write of L.A., the promised land had gotten along fine since the Rams and Raiders had fled from there 2 decades earlier. Here's a little bit of local news from KABC last week talking about the progress of the new stadium in Inglewood.
That tour, and it's such a unique opportunity to really show you the progress of this massive construction and how all of these pieces are coming together. Take a look at that red and white crane, for example. We're told that's one of the largest cranes in the world. It measures nearly as tall as the length of a football field, and it's responsible for lifting the canopy steel. The first piece weighed about 2.4 million pounds. Our cameras got to go inside the stadium, and standing in that bowl is what really puts it all into perspective. It's actually about 52% completed, and it will be the new home of the Los Angeles Chargers and the Los Angeles Rams. It's set to open in 2020 in time to host the Super Bowl 2 years later, as well as the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2028 Olympics.
She's almost beside herself with excitement.
Can I tell you something? Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Los Angeles Rams, you know what? The only thing he'll remember from that report is the fact that she said the Los Angeles Chargers and the Los Angeles Rams. She started with the Chargers. That will rankle him to no end. But look, I mean, the NFL, look, there's this cool structure going up in LA. Like that is like, it is like a Disney World they're building, I guess. It is a stadium, or as the NFL likes to call it in the collective, the stadia, because everything is kind of Roman in the NFL. It's like, and we won't talk about what happened to Rome, but I mean, it's all very over the top. But so the, no, LA is, look, it's imagination. We will see what that thing looks like. But I remember, so actually Roger Goodell was talking about the stadium, and he was saying, it's coming out of the ground now. The bowl is coming out of the ground. It's like, are you talking about some kind of like extraterrestrial? The bowl is coming out of the ground. And this is like something that Stan Kroenke, a very successful real estate developer, married to the heir of the Walmart fortune, is putting maybe $5-6 billion into before this is all over. So that's the start. Now, whether they need 2 football teams there, who the heck knows?
The Raiders was sort of jilted at the altar. You write about Mark Davis. Big Game might be the only football book that is in existence that references Gertrude Stein. Speaking of Oakland, there is no there. What's the
true?
What's the Oakland? What's Oakland's fate as it looks toward its move to Las Vegas?
Well, look, remember Oakland went to Los Angeles. The Oakland Raiders were the Los Angeles Raiders for what, like, let's see, so probably about 20 years or something like that. I still call them the Oakland Raiders. They belong in Oakland. Now, Vegas, I mean, it's going to be different and kind of maybe interesting because, the NFL in Vegas, I mean, you're talking about 2 huge sort of spectacles, and I'd be kind of curious to see what it looks like. But they should still be the Oakland Raiders. I mean, it's one of the iconic franchises. And by the way, the San Diego Chargers should be the San Diego Chargers. I still haven't met a Los Angeles Chargers fan. So, I don't know. This is the natural order of things. And the NFL evolves, but I think it's very, very clunky at sometimes.
It all seems to be working toward this overall annual league revenue goal of going from where it stands now to this holy grail of $25 billion. Right. And I emphasize it in that way because that's the way Jerry Jones might do it, taking a cue from his dad, the grocer in North Little Rock, Arkansas, J.W. Pat Jones, who might say, Mark, we're going to make $1 million.
Right.
Not just $1 million. Tell me about Jerry Jones and his involvement in L.A. and where this all stems from.
Jerry Jones is a larger-than-life personality. He owns the Dallas Cowboys. And he told me that his father, Pat Jones, used to drive him around. And Jerry once made the mistake of speaking casually of $5 million or something. And Pat was very, very, very insistent that he says, Gerald, it's his full name, Gerald, when you say $1 million, you let it roll off your tongue. I don't care if you go from St. Louis to Chicago and it takes you that long to say the words 1 million. Sit with it. Feel it. Let the words roll off your tongue. And it's right out of Austin Powers, right? It's like $1 million. Now, of course, that would be in the billions now. But I think that was an important message from Jerry.
Here is Mr. Jones giving a tour of his Shangri-La AT&T Stadium.
This stadium, I thought what could we do to recognize what Cowboy fans and what this franchise might have meant to the NFL? They should pass a law to let someone like me make these decisions, because if you can get a hold of enough money, you'll go crazy, and that's what I did. First of all, let's just take this big digital board that goes from the 20-yard line to the 20-yard line, 72 feet tall. We have cameras in this dressing room, and with discretion.
With discretion.
Now that's a sanitized
With
version
discretion.
of Jerry Jones.
Yeah.
You're a New England kid venturing down to Dallas.
Yeah, not safe.
Welcomed into this environment a little bit by Mr. Jones.
Yeah.
What was culturally? What was that like, that transition?
Well, he invited me onto the
visit.
We did a visit. Yeah, everything, especially Southern gentlemen of a certain age, you're always visiting. Like, if you talk on the phone for 5 seconds, it's a nice visit, right? Or if you go to Jerry Jones, if you go to interview Jerry Jones and you're invited onto the Dallas Cowboys bus, it's a very memorable or forgettable visit. But no, so I was sitting there interviewing Jerry Jones, and he offered me, after about half hour, a shot of scotch. I'm like, well, sure. I mean, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Why not? And but by shot, he meant, a large, probably 24-ounce Dallas Cowboys souvenir cup full of scotch. And the interview sort of went downhill from there, and it took 5 hours, and I didn't come out of it terribly well, but the tape recorder worked, and the rest is history. But Jerry Jones likes to lubricate his visits with Johnny Walker Blue, which is his preferred beverage.
Now, in a lot of your interviews and podcasts that I've watched, you're pretty quick to say that these 32 owners wouldn't immediately be top candidates for boards of directors, and yet following the American dream, whether you're Stan Kroenke or Jerry Jones, son of Pat Jones of North Little Rock, Arkansas, or Jerry Richardson owning Hardee's franchises in the Carolinas, they've done what they've needed to do to make a whole lot of money and have purchased their franchises and convinced city fathers and corporate sponsors to build edifices like AT&T Stadium. So maybe the interviews that you've done have allowed you to sort of paint these colorful pictures of people like Jerry Jones. But if you think about what these guys have accomplished in their perhaps not mainstream ways of becoming billionaires, even Bob Kraft, they've been very successful in what they've done.
Yeah, and you know what? It all begins and ends with the NFL. I mean, everyone wants a piece of the NFL, whether you're a sponsor or you're looking for some kind of sponsorship relationship or a broadcast deal, some kind of exposure. It is the great spectacle of American life. I remember right after I did my first sort of NFL story for the Times Magazine on Tom Brady, the first person, or one of the first people I did a story on right after, was Donald Trump, then candidate Donald Trump, who wouldn't shut up about how great friends he is with Tom Brady and Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick. But also at a certain point he said, man, the NFL, that is a spectacle. And I think that was his exact word, spectacle. Like, who wouldn't want to be a part of that? And he was saying that in a sort of hostile context, because he had very hostile feelings towards the NFL. They wouldn't let him in. But it is, look, spectacle is what Donald Trump loves. It's what the NFL loves. It's people sort of basically in their own fractured tribal way coming together to pay attention to an event. Political campaigns have become like that. Political conventions. There's a piece of this that's reality TV because you just don't know what's going to happen. There's a piece of this that is basically warfare. There's a piece of this that is great athletic accomplishment. There's a piece of this that's my town versus your town. For as global and as singularly spectacle-ridden as this all is, this is sort of small-town parochial. Is Dallas better than Washington this week? That's sort of what it comes down to. And look, people pay attention and people watch the Super Bowl, and as the ratings bear out, people care. Whether they are vowing to never watch another football game again, they care because if their team's in the playoffs, they're probably going to watch.
After the break, we talk with Mark Leibovich about the head of the league, its biggest star, the man who thrust it into the political spin cycle, and the challenges the Shield faces in the generation ahead. That's right after this.
Billions of dollars in funding have been cut from youth sports programs in recent years, leaving millions of students unable to play. Dick's Sporting Goods believes sports matter. Sports build character, increase confidence, and motivate kids to stay in school and aim for higher education. Since 2014, Dix and the Dix Foundation have committed $50 million through their Sports Matter initiative to combat the youth sports funding crisis. To date, they're humbled to have helped over 1 million youth athletes in need across all 50 states. Learn more about this crisis of youth sports at sportsmatter.org.
Back now with Mark Leibovich, Chief National Correspondent at the New York Times Magazine, author of This Town, and now Big Game, the NFL in Dangerous Times. As a PR guy, Mark, we always face the question of whether to expose our bosses to writers like you. Around 345 Park Avenue, the question is, when a call from Leibovich comes in, what is the upside of this?
It's always the question. It's not just 345 Park Avenue, and it's not just me. Look, I think whether you put your person in front of a journalist is always a cost-benefit analysis. And yeah, I don't know why, Roger or others agreed to talk to me, but I'm very glad they did.
A guy has total authority over his league, but he also has 32 bosses.
Correct.
Paint a picture of the King's Court. You write about Jeff Pash, the league's general counsel, who has this, quote, excessive tendency to lawyer up over everything. How does the world of Roger Goodell compare to Pete Rozelle and Paul Tagliabue and their respective staffs? I mean, you mentioned that there is some frustration that Goodell feels maybe spurred on by some of the owners that the people around you aren't as good as they should be, Roger.
Right. Yeah, I think, look, Roger Goodell has not, historically in his 12 years as commissioner, had a lot of strong people around him. He has run off a lot of people. He hasn't really found a successful number two. Todd Leibovich, who you mentioned, is no longer with the company, and he was going to be, basically the guy who runs the day-to-day of the league. That didn't work out. PR has been a huge problem for the league. They've gone through a lot of heads of communications. Look, Roger Goodell, like a lot of leaders, some of whom might be insecure leaders, has not, for whatever reason, been able to surround himself with people who might be seen as replacements for him or who might give him too much of a hassle. And I think Roger Goodell, as part of the nature of his job, is so focused on keeping the owners happy. They are his bosses. He is their boss. It's a very strange dynamic that sometimes I think he doesn't let the day-to-day of how an organization works at a big, basically entertainment and production company just should work, in that, you just don't have a lot of executives around him that you would sort of pick and say, okay, he's number 2, number 3, number 4 of one of the top entertainment companies in the world, and let's make him the CEO of, Netflix or something like that. You just haven't seen it. You
and I both were regular subscribers to Sports Illustrated.
Still am.
For all of our childhood, and
Absolutely.
You still are.
Yes. You're not anymore?
I don't think so.
That's all right.
There was one particular issue, a non-athlete on the cover of Sportsman of the Year. It was Pete Rozelle.
The first non-athlete to be Sportsman of the Year. I think it was in the 60s sometime. Yeah.
And as you were sort of mining around the stories and the video of Rozelle and compared it to the Tagliabue era that you write about, and how Paul sort of outlived his welcome with the owners and vice versa, right, and Goodell today. Goodell is the son of a U.S. senator. He is a backslapper and shaker of hands extraordinaire, as you write. But what was the difference in the pixie dust that Rozelle had compared to Goodell, or was it just such simpler times of John Facenda and no concussions?
You answered a big part of the question right there at the end. It was a much simpler league. The union, it was just there are certainly union issues and workplace issues, but it was very different. I think the classic example of this was when Paul Hornung of the Green Bay Packers and Alex Karras of the Detroit Lions, two of the biggest stars in the league in the early 60s, were busted for links to gambling, right? There was a long investigation. The league did it themselves. There was a brief. Pete Rozelle basically said, all right, these guys have to be suspended for a year. He calls in Vince Lombardi, the iconic coach of Paul Hornung. He said, look, we have this brief. Here's what we found. I'm going to suspend him for the year. What do you think? Lombardi reads the brief and said, yep, you got to suspend him. Let's go have a drink. They had a drink, and that was it. It was done. Today you would have all kinds of lawsuits, and the union would be right in the middle of it, and there'd be all kinds of language in the collective bargaining agreement and all kinds of back and forth and media wars and everything. So very much simpler league. And look, I think Pete Rozelle was a very smooth figure. I think I didn't quite realize this when I was a kid, but in retrospect, when you hear people talking about him, and maybe it's through the gauzy eye of nostalgia, he clearly had a handle on things. He knew how to handle people. He was much more confident. He didn't have as many lawyers in his ears. He didn't have as many market research people in his ears. He didn't play as scared. He really had command of the league, and I think but at the root of it is it was a much simpler league and a much easier league to run.
Let's talk about your sideline chat with Goodell in Charlotte. It's a very interesting day, I think, because if you think about the weather patterns that were going up the East Coast, the commissioner, as you write, is shoveling the driveway in Bronxville so that he and the First Lady of the Shield can go out to Soul Cycle before they get on their Gulfstream and fly down to Charlotte. You, meanwhile, are driving through the slop from Washington, D.C. to try and get there.
It was heavy snow. It was serious. And there was no way around it. There was no flights leaving Washington, and my wife was not happy about this. But they said, hey, you want to speak to the commissioner? He wants to do it on the field. Now, I'm sure there was strategery involved in this because it was a terrible place to have an interview. Really loud, constant interruptions, and the commissioner could only speak for a certain amount of time, and there was always an escape route. So it was strategically kind of a bad place for an interview, but also, it was actually one, it was cool to be on the field before the NFL championship game. I saw a lot, but also you sort of saw him in a very political element. He was just greeting people. He was slapping backs and doing his whole Goodell thing. And then Jerry Richardson, then the owner of the Carolina Panthers, shows up on his little cart. And I got to see Goodell just lock in on him. Just you sort of, okay, this is by far the most important person in this stadium of 70,000 people. It's the most important person I will talk to this day because he's one of my bosses. At this moment, he's unhappy because he didn't like the way the LA thing was resolved, even though his team is about to play for the Super Bowl. And yeah, it was an interesting thing to watch.
And yet you had important questions to ask him. I think this was your chance to get in some questions about concussions. This is the way Goodell answered a similar question to Charlie Rose back in 2015.
Where are we with respect to concussions today?
Well, we've made significant changes to the game at the NFL level, which I think have impacted all levels of the game. We've had a 25% reduction in concussions just last season. That continues a 3-year trend, which is about 35%. And I think a lot of that is because there's more awareness. There are better processes in place with our medical personnel to identify the injury. But we are preventing these injuries through rule changes, through equipment. We saw a significant reduction in hits to the head.
You write about the Rams quarterback. Who was it?
It was then Case Keenum.
Case Keenum. You also wrote in a different part of the book about the game that you and I were both watching in different locales, a Patriots playoff game, and Julian Edelman getting his bell rung.
The Super Bowl against Seattle. Yeah.
And what goes through the psychology of a viewing fan, whether they care about Case Keenum's game or not. In most cases, you and I don't, but we certainly care about Julian in the Super Bowl. But what we're saying, we're wrestling with our own psyche. I hope he's okay. Please don't let the injury ref see.
Yeah, no, I remember saying that exactly. And by the way, I wasn't wrestling at all. I just wanted him to keep playing because he was probably their best receiver on the field at that moment. I mean, it is a cognitive dissonance that every football fan goes through because, there's the part of your brain that says, wow, I don't want this guy to be hurt. But then there's the part that says, we need this guy. He wants to get up. I think I saw him sort of stagger a little bit, but, look, maybe he's going to hide it, and probably everyone on the sideline wants him to hide it. And if the referee up in the booth doesn't see it, he can keep playing, and we can keep driving down the field, and maybe we can make up this 10-point lead. But look, it's a constant. It's not easy sometimes to just let go and be an NFL fan. I think the awareness is a curse in that way. But look, I think I'd rather have the awareness.
Bring us into 345 Park or Boston University and the CTE program. Yeah. I mean, what is really happening in terms of deciding that whether you or I want Edelman to get up, we can't afford to let these guys get up and stay in the game?
Look, there is a constant. I'm personally of the belief that the game will never be safe at any speed. I think the risk is inherent. I think I think, again, awareness is good, and that people will know what they're doing more and more. And I do think that the commissioner's somewhat mealy-mouthed approach to this, which is, maybe throwing a few statistics out there. They always talk about the number of rule changes and how they're preventing concussions, and then there are these new figures that show concussions have in fact gone up this year and down the next year, and then all these studies on dead football players' brains show this. I mean, it's going to be a mess. There's always going to be some kind of statistic or testimonial or something that's going to give people pause. But the fact is, it's an unsafe game. You can probably affect it at the margins with equipment, rule changes, but it's something I think people are just going to have to accept or not.
There's one person who seems not to be too worried about the concussion problem. I remember the time that I was working in the White House helping the president celebrate Super Bowl victors. It was a pleasant tradition, and I might call it an Anthony Pleasant tradition, which is an inside joke.
Yes.
But in 2016, into the fray steps the current president on the campaign trail, himself, as you mentioned, the former USFL owner and a longtime aspirant to the membership. Let's hear President Trump.
What used to be considered a great tackle, a violent, head-on, violent, if that was done by Dick Butkus, that say he's the greatest player, if that were done by Lawrence Taylor, it was done by Lawrence Taylor and Dick Butkus. And Ray Nitschke, right? Ray Nitschke. Used to see these tackles, and it was incredible to watch, right? Now they tackle. Oh, head-on-head collision, 15-yard. The whole game is all screwed up. You say, wow, what a tackle. Bing, flag. Football's become soft.
He wants to return to the halcyon days.
What's interesting is that clip broke off, but the other part of the quote is football has gone soft, and he said America has gone soft. Yeah. And that was on the campaign trail. I was at an event in Reno, Nevada, about a year before Kaepernick started kneeling and before Kaepernick became his own sort of Trumpian target. But Donald Trump, as part of his odd genius, was able to identify football as this culture war field. And for as much as the left has always sort of said, look, we're suspicious of the NFL, it's too violent, people get hurt, it's not safe, Donald Trump at that moment sort of identified football as something that was being ruined by political correctness, in the same way that the America that was allegedly great, that he was trying to make great again, had been ruined by political correctness, had been sissified by liberals. And it's the exact same kind of metaphor, and that was sort of one of the things he identified early on as a campaign theme, again, well before Colin Kaepernick came along.
You write about the spectacle of the NFL draft. What was once contained nicely within Radio City Music Hall has now gone on the road to increase both excitement and revenue for the league. I want to hear the reception the commissioner got when he came to the draft at Dallas earlier this year.
Here comes Roger Goodell to open the draft, and he's joined by some special guests, all former winners of the Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year Award presented by Nationwide, and also Cowboys royalty.
It's amazing.
They're not cheering Boog Powell, are they?
I don't think so, unless Boog Powell was out on the stage. I mean, what's interesting about that is the NFL PR mavens have always been trying to put human shields around him, players that you couldn't possibly boo. I mean, just people beyond reproach, and they surround the commissioner with that, and yet they still find him and they boo lustily. It's like he's become this Vince McMahon character, and I still don't for the life of me know why they put him through that. Why don't they just find you're in Dallas, okay? Get Roger Staubach to come out and announce the draft. Hug the players. You're in Chicago. Get Dick Butkus to do it, or Brian Urlacher.
I mean, he had Troy Aikman and Staubach right with him, all these great Cowboys.
Make them do it. I mean, pay them something. Really, how hard is it to go out, read an index card, and hug a guy in a suit?
But you mentioned Vince McMahon, WWE, NYSE ticker symbol WWE. You look at that video filling AT&T Stadium, the spectacle and the TV rights and the commercial opportunities involved. You almost say, I'll take those boos for a few minutes if it gets people to tune in. And you also write about this amazing example at one of the drafts, I think 2016, Laramie Tunsil, because Tunsil was headed for a top 10 pick. Mm-hmm. And you can tell me what happens, but in the end of the day, it was almost accepted as part of the drama of draft day.
Yeah, Laramie Tunsil, talked about as like a top 3 pick from an offensive tackle for Ole Miss. Great player. He's feeling all good about himself. And then so this is in Chicago at this old theater, forgot what it's called, but right as the draft started, and people might remember this, someone hacked his Twitter account and put out like a picture or a little video. It might have been Instagram. No, it was his Twitter account, a little video of him smoking like out of a bong with a gas mask.
A gas mask
attached
bong.
to it, a gas mask bomb, which is a bizarre sight to see anyone in a gas mask, let alone an enormous like 6'7" guy, with a bong attached to it. A very troubling look, I would say. This thing is the only thing people are talking about. It's viral as heck. All the media is going crazy. He's dropping like a stone. Like he doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So all the mock drafts that had him going in the top 5 out the window. Teams that needed an offensive lineman. And then there's a question, is this guy going to be drafted at all? What is this? Is it authentic? What was he doing? Who took it? It was bizarre. And that became the story of the draft. And this kid, Laramie Tunsil, eventually was drafted by the Miami Dolphins at 12. But he probably lost tens of millions of dollars and watching his reputation and this nightmare play out, riveting for 3 hours. Again, it was a great story if you're watching. It's like watching a train wreck. And then the next day, Roger Goodell, and this was one of the many sort of inelegant comments he might make, in an interview, I think with Colin Cowherd, or it might have been Mike and Mike, one of those safe sports interviews he does the morning after, he said, he was asked about the Tunsil story, and he said, that's what makes the NFL draft so exciting. Basically, hey, it's reality show fodder. And Eric Winston, who's the president of the NFL Players Association, played for the Bengals, he then just absolutely went on this Twitter tirade against the commissioner for saying, hey, so this kid's dream his kid gets humiliated on national television. His dream just gets raked over the coals. And all you can think about is how this is great for drama.
And all of this marketing and decoration of the site was all about welcome to the family.
Yeah.
That the NFL is a family and this is the day for these hundreds of kids to realize their dreams and get assigned to one of the 32 teams. But in fact, it's all business. It's
certainly all business. But yeah, you go over wherever the draft is held, certainly that year in Chicago, there's banners all over the city with the NFL logo on it, the shield. And it's just the welcome to the family, because these great football players are joining a family, at least for a total of 3.3 years until their non-guaranteed contracts are ended by the players. And if this were a visual thing, I would show you on my iPhone. I have a picture of me standing with my arms folded in front of a welcome to the family sign in Chicago. But it's no one's family.
To bring our conversation to a close, Mark Leibovich, you write about the Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, and two men that are destined to have their busts immortalized in bronze are certainly Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. Belichick has this ambiguous place with the league, participating in the sort of how we did it retrospectives on his 5 Super Bowl wins, but also getting, as you write, muy enojado as when he's forced to play south of the border.
Yes.
Hear a little bit of Belichick reacting to that game once they got out of town.
I think we're fortunate there was no volcano eruptions or earthquakes or anything else while we were down there. I mean, you have 2 NFL franchises in an area that I don't know how stable the geological plates were below us.
Wow.
So we were there when Belichick made his strange move to the Patriots and the Jets, and suddenly and started this run that has won him 5 Super Bowls. But we continue to endure his hooded curmudgeonliness all these decades. Where is his place going to be in the pantheon of the league?
Well, look, great coach, probably the greatest coach ever. As a consumer of the league, I don't particularly like watching his press conferences. I think his act is, again, personally, it's worn thin, but I don't have to play for him. I think his place in history is assured.
And then there's Brady. It was his email to you that started you on this journey. It brought you into his family in San Mateo, to their last Super Bowl trip to Minnesota, the action playing out not at U.S. Bank Field, but at a bowling alley somewhere outside of Minneapolis.
Edina.
My kids and I, over this weekend, we binged on Tom versus Time, the Facebook series that you write about as well. When you got into that final audio file that he sent you earlier this spring, did you feel like the myth of clock management had really run its course?
Not really. Look, Tom Brady just wants to keep playing football. And I think, again, if he were a linebacker or a safety, it'd be harder because his body would be much more beaten up. But Tom Brady is someone that, despite all of the resentment around him, the noise around him, the speculation around him, the snickering around his diet and his training regimen, is a fairly normal and simple guy in his own way. He loves playing football, and we can look down on it. But look, I get to do what I want to do. You get to do what you want to do until we're, 60, 70 years old. I mean, we don't have any physical limits. And I think if you find something in life that you love to do so much, and it's supposed to last only a few years, and you have found a way to cheat time and then sort of, certainly play time to a standstill when you're into your 40s and you amass what he's amassed, why not just try to keep going? But I think the other side of that is, what's it going to be like to walk away? I mean, I've talked to so many people who used to play who just couldn't. I mean, it's like they don't realize how exhilarating that life was. Not so much the lifestyle and the wealth. I mean, that's obviously part of it. And there's not a lot of wealth. It's just the exhilaration of being on a football field. And I guess you become addicted to that in the same way that we became addicted to playing football in the backyard after school, but that didn't play as well. But no, I think it's a time. It's like, look, it's mortality in some ways.
One of those people who are addicted to playing on the field, and you write about this, is Tony Dorsett. And you ran into him at a league event
in Canton,
Canton during the process of writing the book. I want to hear that 99-yard run and reflect on what it means.
Line defense for the Vikings. A handoff, Dorsett up the middle. Here he goes. Cuts to his right. Going all the way. To the 30. To the 40. He's got two men to beat. To the 40. To the 30. To the 20. To the 10. The 5. Touchdown! Unbelievable! Tony Dorsett is in the record books. 99 yards.
Amazing. Yeah, a 99-yard from scrimmage, Monday Night Football against Minnesota. Remember it vividly. And I walked right up to him in Canton, and like an 8-year-old, I all of a sudden was again. I said, actually, I would have been 14. Hey, I'll never forget that. And he said, there were only 10 men on the field. And that thing we just listened to, there was only 10 men on the field for that because Ron Springs, the fullback, was confused, and he was on the sidelines. And he also pointed out that record could only be tied, never broken. And he remembered everything about it, but I've read enough about Tony Dorsett's post-playing career to know that, like many great football players, there was an incredible physical toll. He can't remember what he did 10 minutes ago. There's someone helping him at all times. He's in chronic pain. And you have these encounters, and certainly in reporting big game, I had those encounters a lot, where you are always mixing the glory with the pain and what the game has done to you. And for as sweet as the memories are, the toll is real.
And a guy like Dorsett has those NFL film highlights to look back on. We all do, but not a lot more that he was able to create. And you think about this creation of this 6-part series of Tom versus Time that was in some ways, a revolt against the box that the NFL puts its elite players in. You will conform to the story that we want to tell of you. But in your reporting, what did you see about how Tom made the decision to show parts of this Chestnut Hill, Yellowstone Club, China life that doesn't conform to league mythology?
It's interesting because one of the phenomena of modern athletes is that they have social media. I mean, this wasn't true 10, 15 years ago. They can control their message to a point. In the same way that Bill Belichick can stonewall, the media on a day-to-day basis from his coaching bunker, but then sort of open the kimono and tell NFL films how smart they are, and open make his coaches available to talk about their Super Bowl game plan. Tom Brady is the same way. He decides that I'm going to take control of my story. I'm going to go into business basically with my friend Gautam Chopra, who's a filmmaker, who I got to know, a very, very talented filmmaker. And the two of them basically work together, say, what story do I want to tell about my life? I want to let people in. I want to give people a sense of reality TV, but I want complete control of it. And when you're Tom Brady and when you have a social media platform like Facebook in this case at your disposal, you can do that. And I thought it was pretty innovative. And, he caught some heat because he was putting himself above the team. But I found it fascinating and very, very well done.
So on the field, in the injury tent, at the White House, and at 345 Park, the NFL has its fill of challenges. As a fan, as a watcher, as a reporter, does it get beyond them? Will we still watch? Will it remain the greatest marketing vehicle the country's ever created?
Maybe not. There's no guarantee. I think the going's good now, right? And there's always a story some weekend, whether it's the guy retiring at halftime for the Buffalo Bills or, I was in... I had this great little wise-ass opener at the Boston thing. I said, hey, thanks for coming out tonight and missing the Browns-Jets game. Got a good laugh. And then, go back, catch the second half, and lo and behold, the Browns are coming back, and Baker Mayfield's on the team, and everyone in Cleveland is going crazy, and this is the biggest story in football for the next 48 hours, and, they can't wait for the next Browns game. And so, look, it just surprises you. Week one, everything was gloom and doom, the anthem thing, Trump's weighing in again. And then all of a sudden Sunday night comes along, there's speculation, are the ratings down? And then Aaron Rodgers comes out, they're getting killed by the Bears at halftime, and then he pulls like a Willis Reed, Kirk Gibson, and they come back. And I was texting with David Marinas, who is a great Packer fan, very ambivalent football fan, like
Lombardi's
I am.
chronicler.
Great Vince Lombardi biography. And I said, hey, go Packers. And he said, I love football. And I know that he has a very love-hate relationship with football, but at that moment, Aaron Rodgers, made his week, and he and his son were texting back and forth and going nuts.
That's the memories we make.
That's what the magic of the NFL is. That's what saves it. But there might come a time when the NFL won't be saved, and there won't be something to come along, whether on the field or whether it's Fox wanting to spend, however billions of dollars for the Thursday night game to bail everyone out and to sort of keep everyone coming back.
Thanks for joining us in the Ice House.
Great to be here, Josh.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Mark Leibovich, Chief National Correspondent of the New York Times Magazine and author of Big Game, The NFL in Dangerous Times. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at NYSE. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Ian Wolfe with production assistance from Ken Abel and Stephen Portner. I'm Josh King, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of this information, and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or recommendation of any security or trading practice.